As far as you were a drug dealer, correct, sir? Yes, sir. That's what you were, right? Yes, sir. And you moved on in your life, right? Yes, sir. But between 1999 and 2009, you were a drug dealer at Gladys and Pulaski, correct? Yes, sir. Now, in or around 2009, did your drug operation change a little? Yes, you saying 2009, did it change? In or around 2009, did you start moving on from just selling bags to some other things? Yes, so I started selling weight myself. So weight, again, I think as you described it, it's larger quantities of drugs, correct? Yes. And what type of weight were you selling between 2009 and 2013? $100 pieces. And it was on that same corner? Yes, sir. Or like bars, people call on the phone, things like that. So let's talk about that for a second. The operation was generally a corner for you, right? Yes, sir. But then now you're moving weight. So did you start using the phone a little bit more? Yes, sir. And why? People would actually call you? Yeah. Now, when you start moving weight and you start receiving phone calls, you're selling larger quantities of drugs, correct? Yes, sir. Do you also have money on you more often? Yes, sir. And is the drug business a business that you use credit cards or write personal checks? No, sir. What is it? Cash business. Between 2009 and 2013, Mr. Fountain, did you generally have a lot of cash on you? Yes, sir. Did your operation expand a little to Arthington and Cicero? A little bit. But is it fair to say you had a reach now that you were available over the phone where people could call? Yes, sir. And you could deliver drugs to not people just on the block, correct? Yes, sir. So let's go back to that period, 2009, 2013. You're moving weight on the west side of Chicago as a drug dealer. Approximately how much were you making on an average day, if you know? 35 to 4,000 a day. You're going to have to speak up. I can't hear you. About 3,500 to 4,000 a day. So on an average day, you are making between $3,500 and $4,000 cash? Yes, sir. And at the end of the night, you generally would have this money on you? Yes, sir. You were selling heroin as well? Yes, sir. Let's talk about Mr. Labar Spann for a minute. Back between that same time period again, when you're moving weight, particularly around 2010 to 2012, do you know if Mr. Spann controlled any drug territory? Yeah, he always controlled the area. What do you mean by that? Well, his position, he always had some type of say-so in the area. What was his position? Well, at first, he was just a 5-star universal. Then he called himself the chief. Chief of the Four Corner Hustlers? Yes, sir. Between 2010 and 2012, did Mr. Spann continue to control some territory in the 3,900 and 4,000 blocks of Lexington, Polk, Arthington, and Taylor? Yes, sir. Was there any other spot on Pulaski that he controlled as well? Jackson. Was that near 5th and Pulaski? Yeah, he controlled 5th too. That's all in the area you just said. All of them his blocks. And when we say controlled, are we talking about drug sales? Yes, sir. Anything that go on over there. What do you mean by that? Anything that go on over there, you gotta go through him. Now, I'd like to talk about some interactions, if you recall, that you had with Mr. Spann between 2010 and 2012. During that time period, when you were moving weight, had a lot of cash on you, do you remember Mr. Spann ever asking anything of you? Yes, sir. What? Give him some money for some guns and some rentals. He called me several times for cash. Okay, let's talk about, if you remember, the first time. Yeah. Why don't you describe that to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the first time Mr. Spann asked you for something between 2010 and 2012? He was on house arrest near North Avenue and like McVickers, somewhere over that way. He called me over there. Now, Mr. Fountain, everyone's trying to listen, myself included. Can you speak a little bit slower and try to talk into that mic, okay? Yes, sir. Okay. He called me in the area of North Avenue and McVickers, something like that. Mr. Spann called you? Yes, sir. So were you easily accessible to people over the phone? No, people that know people give out numbers, things like that. So you received a phone call from Mr. Spann sometime between 2010, 2012, the first time, and did Mr. Spann request to meet you somewhere? Yes, sir. And where was that? He was on house arrest, so it was like at his crib, wherever he was on house arrest at. Did you go over to Mr. Spann's? Yeah, in the alley in the back. And did you meet Mr. Spann? Yes, sir. And what did Mr. Spann ask for you? Ask of anything from you? For some money. Did you give him any money? Yes, sir. How much? 500. Now, let me ask an obvious question. Why? Why do you go if someone calls you and says, come over to my house and give me money? Why do you do that? At first, the first call, he used to play like he was cool with me. But, just to keep him away from me, he calls a lot in the West Side. He could have you hurt, so you just give it to him. You stay out of his hair, like get him out your hair. Can you? I couldn't understand him. Can you? My court reporter can't understand. Sir, you've got to make an effort to enunciate, speak slowly, and try to say your words where we can all understand them. Okay. Because this isn't going to work otherwise. If my court reporter can't pick it up and she's got headphones on, nobody else can. So ask your question again, and make an effort to speak slowly. Try and pronounce your words so that we can all understand you, and make sure you speak loud enough where we can hear you too, okay? Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Fountain, you just testified that you were at Mr. Spann's house, I believe, in the alley. You're meeting with Mr. Spann because he called you to come over? Yes, sir. You testified that you gave Mr. Spann between $400 and $500. I asked you a question, why? Can you explain that again, please, a little bit slower? Why would you give someone calls you, in this case Mr. Spann, says he needs money, You drive over there and give him money? Because I don't want the conflict behind not giving him money. You gave him money that day. Did you leave? Yes, sir. Between 2010 and 2012, was that the only time Mr. Spann called you for money? No, sir. Did he call you often after that? Yes, sir. And what would he say? He'll try to befriend me, acting like he was my friend, but then he'll say he needed a couple dollars to do something. This was around 2010, 2011? Yes, sir. And what would you do? I would meet with him and give him a couple dollars. When you say a couple dollars, a few hundred. $400 to $500? Yes, sir. Did you meet with him approximately 6 or 7 times in 2011 and do that? Yes, sir. Now, 2012 rolls around. Was Mr. Spann still calling you? I was like changing my phones all the time, but he'll call when he gets the numbers from someone. He get lucky and get the number. Why were you changing your phone? I ain't trying to just give people my money for nothing. Was one of the reasons you had to change your phone was because Mr. Spann was calling so much? Yes, sir. Did Mr. Spann at some point between 2011, between 2011 and 2012, did he begin to call you monthly? Yeah, he wanted to just meet up with me monthly. And did you then eventually have to start meeting up with him monthly? No, I started like ignoring his calls and things like that. And do you remember the money increasing when you would begin to meet Mr. Spann? Just one time. What happened that one time? I gave him $2,000. Was that in 2012? Yes, sir. Where was that at? I honestly can't remember. It had to be at like a gas station or on the side street of the street somewhere, 'cause he seen me in traffic. He saw you in traffic? Yes, sir. Did you ever ask Mr. Spann, or did he ever tell you what the money was for? No, he used to always say it was for the same thing, guns and rental cars, things like that, but for him. And would Mr. Spann demand the money over the phone, or did he also do it in person sometimes? If he couldn't get in contact with me on the phone and he seen me in traffic somewhere out, he'll ask for it then, like that, but usually he'll try to call. When you would meet him on these occasions to give him the money, was he by himself all the time, or sometimes did he have other people with him? Yeah, he had people with him, people in the cars behind him. Did Mr. Spann drive a car? Yes, all the time. And to be clear, Mr. Fountain, this period of time between 2010 and 2012 that you're giving Mr. Spann money, did you owe Mr. Spann any money? Not at all. Were you paying off some debts to Mr. Spann? No, sir. You owed him nothing. Nothing at all. Now, you indicated sometimes people were with Mr. Spann, correct? Yes, sir. So I think you described it, or let me ask you, sometimes were they seated in the vehicle with him? Sometimes, but most of the time, he had someone trailing him in the car behind him. What do you mean by that? They'll be like following him wherever he go. They behind him in traffic. And you were aware of this? Yes, sir. Do you remember some of the people in 2011 and 2012 that you witnessed with Mr. Spann when you were paying him $400 or $500 or $2,000? Yes, sir. And what were some of their names, if you remember? Scarface, Tito, Lil Boss, all of them. It'll be a few people every time in the car or in the car behind him. Judge, may I have the ELMO, please? Okay, you just indicated a few names. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph, Government's Exhibit 136? Yes, sir. Who's that? They call him Scarface. He was one of the people with Mr. Spann when... Yes, sir. You would give money to Mr. Spann between 2010 and 2012? Yes, sir. And when they were with him, were they just kind of sitting there staring at you? Yeah. Scarface, you knew him as? Yes, sir. Let me show you Government's Exhibit 138. Do you recognize the individual in that photograph? Yes, sir. Who's that? That's Lil Boss. Again, was he, as you described, with Mr. Spann? Yes, sir. Either in his car or the trailer car? Yes, sir. When you give Mr. Spann money? Yes, sir. How about Government's Exhibit 101? Lil Keith. Again, same? Yes, sir. Either in the car with Mr. Spann or in a trailer car? Yes, sir. Judge, can I have 1 second? And that's Government's 101, Lil Keith. Now, going back to Government's 138, Lil Boss. Uh-huh. Do you ever remember having an encounter with Lil Boss and Mr. Spann? One time at the nightclub, they kept pulling on the side of me, asking me about my watch and things like that. So let's stop it for a second. You're at a nightclub? Uh-huh. West side of Chicago? Yes, sir. Do you remember where the nightclub was? Like Central and I'll say Diversey? And who was there? We was actually leaving the club. We was in the truck. I was in my truck and they was in their van and they pulled on the side of me. And Little Boss was there? Yes, he was in the passenger side. And Labar Spann was there? Yeah, he was driving. And what did Lil Boss say? Judge, I'm going to object. Just a little more foundation about when this happened. Yes, please. Sure. 2012. Sometime in 2012? Yes, sir. And what happened? As we was leaving the club, they pulled on the side. They said something about my truck, and then they said something about my watch. And Lil Boss was saying, like, you could tell he was getting finna to ask for something, so I just pulled off. You just pulled off? Yes, sir. So this is how life was for you between 2010 and 2012? Yes, sir. You indicated someone else that you saw with them. Do you recognize Government's Exhibit 130? Yes, sir. Who's that person? That's Tito. And the same, he was with Mr. Spann either in a car or a trailer car when they would ask? Yes. Mr. Spann would ask you for money between 2010 and 2012? Yes, sir. You indicated a few minutes ago that Mr. Spann saw you once. Describe that between 2010 and 2012. You said you were driving and Mr. Spann saw you. What happened in that incident? Oh, We was leaving the club on Central, and him and Lil Boss pulled on the side of me and my truck in the van and got to talking, but I knew they was finna getting on bullshit. Excuse me. I knew they was going to do something silly, so I just left. So it wasn't unusual to be driving around the west side of Chicago, and Mr. Spann would spot you here or there in a car and try to catch up to you to talk to you? Yes, sir. And again, at that time period, you generally had a lot of cash on you? Yes, sir. You indicated you gave Mr. Spann $400, $500 sometimes on the monthly, and then you remember paying him $2,000 once. Did you ever pay Mr. Spann anything else? No, sir. I'm sorry? No, sir, not after the $2,000 I gave him. Do you remember ever in 2012 giving Mr. Spann any narcotics? Yes, I gave him the narcotics earlier 2012. And how much narcotics did you give him in early 2012? 10 grams of heroin. And how much would 10 grams of heroin have been worth in early 2012? $800. So was this another occasion where Mr. Spann was asking for some money, and instead of money, you just gave him heroin? Yes, sir. This heroin transaction, do you remember where that occurred? Did it have a who? Do you remember where you gave Mr. Spann the heroin? Oh, he pulled up to the car wash. Where was the car wash? On Washington and Kilpatrick. Do you remember if Mr. Spann, anyone was in the car with Mr. Spann? He had some shorty in the car. I don't know him. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph? May I have the iPro, or may I have the ELMO, Your Honor? Sammy. Government's Exhibit 100. Who do you recognize that individual to be? Sammy. Who's Sammy? A guy that grew up in the area with us. Was Sammy a member of a gang? Yes, sir. What gang? Four Corner Hustlers. How do you know that? Just from hearing about it. He was older than me, so I used to just hear about things he used to do. Before his brother tell me things. I'm sorry? Can you please enunciate? His brother. You knew his brother? Yes, sir. Before I go on, we'll come back to Sammy in a moment. Government's Exhibit 136, you identified this individual as Scarface. Was Scarface a member of a gang? Yes, sir. What gang? Four Corner Hustlers. And how do you know that? We was all in the same area. You interacted with him? Yes, sir. And who did he report to? Brother Man, Labar Spann. Is Bro Man Labar Spann's nickname? Yes, sir. Government Exhibit 138, you identified this person as Lil Boss. Do you know if Lil Boss was a member of a gang? Yes, sir. What gang? Four Corner Hustlers. How do you know that? 'Cause he used to be up under Labar Spann. He was with Labar Spann? Yes, sir. Reported to Labar Spann? Yes, sir.